Immigration's a national concern regulated mainly by the federal government, but a new study shows enforcement can also vary depending on more localized enforcement and political climate. To tell us about the pattern is a director of communications for the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy, or MIRA coalition, Marion Davis. Thank you very much for being with us, Marion.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
First of all, tell us about the report and the people who put it out.
So this is a report from TRACK, which is a program at Syracuse University that analyzes data on immigration enforcement and is the most robust and most reliable data that we have available, because even though ICE gives us some statistics, they don't give us anywhere near the kind of detail that we get from TRACK.
Now, one of the important things about the pattern in this report is that enforcement seems to be different in what we refer to as either sanctuary cities or maybe even by extension sanctuary states, at least with what goes on in Boston. I mean, what does that mean exactly?
So one of the things that this shows is about 4 in 5 arrests made by ICE in the interior of the country. So let's put aside the border, but like in the interior of the country, about 4 in 5 arrests at this point is done through what is called the Secure Communities program. And Secure Communities is a program that of collaboration with state and local law enforcement agencies. And some of this some of this doesn't vary depending on the policies of the cities, because it's just mandatory. So when you get arrested, or when I get arrested, for example, if I were to be arrested today, into a database would go my name, my date of birth, my place of birth. So I would be flagged as having been born in Costa Rica, and what charge I was arrested on. And then in the ICE office, they would look at that, and they would be, maybe they would have an alert set up. So they skip the Americans, but every time they find somebody who was born abroad, that pops up and they look at them. And so the difference is in what happens after. So once ICE picks out somebody, they can either issue a detainer, which is what happens very often. They really like that, which is basically sending a fax or an email or whatever to the police department and saying, hold that person for 48 hours so that we can come and get them, because we think that they are wanted for being in the country undocumented, or because they're deportable for a reason. The other possibility is that the police department says, oh, look at this, we just arrested a Costa Rican. Let's call ICE. That is a notification. That is not something that is required. It's completely optional. Or another possibility is that the police department says, she's going to go free in the morning. Let's call ICE and say, she's going to be out at 8 a.m. Come and get her. And that is where you see the big pattern, the big difference. In communities where detainers are not being honored and where ICE is not being notified on a regular basis of the opportunity to come and arrest undocumented immigrants, is happening a lot less than it is in places that are aggressively collaborating with ICE.
Now, of course, another option is somebody who's arrested could be released within a fairly short period of time, because that's what normally happens when anybody's arrested, right?
Right. So most of the time, when a U.S. citizen is arrested, unless they have committed a really horrible crime, usually they will be released on bail. Or sometimes, of course, you just don't get charged because it turns out that it wasn't really a chargeable offense, or you're the wrong guy. But what is happening with some immigrants is that they are never getting out, because instead they're being derailed into ICE custody. So maybe, you got arrested for shoplifting, but it turned out that they discovered that you had crossed the border without permission 10 years ago, and so you never see the light of day again.
Well, one thing that certainly strikes me looking at this report is that there are some states where the enforcement is a lot tougher, like Arizona. So what does that mean?
Arizona is spectacularly aggressive. So they did this in arrests by per 1,000 residents, and I have to pull up and you have, in Arizona, they have about more than 20 arrests per 1,000 unauthorized residents, whereas in New Jersey, it's about 2, and New York is also about 2. What stands out to me is that in Massachusetts, it's about 6. We are somewhere between Florida and Ohio, which is not where we usually think of ourselves as being.
Now, what does this mean in terms of, number one, how the general public feels about, I guess, safety? I mean, is there some effect? Has anybody shown that if you're tougher in one place, it'll be better for people all around, or what?
The only thing that we know for sure is that when you have the police actively collaborating with ICE and they send a strong message that, the police are aggressively pursuing people for immigration offenses, which aren't crimes, by the way, they're civil offenses. When that happens, people become very afraid of the police. And what that means is that actually detracts from law enforcement, because if you are undocumented and you're living next door to a drug dealer, you're not going to call the police. Or if your house got broken into, or if you got mugged, or if you're a woman being abused by her husband, you're not going to seek help because you're afraid that when that police officer comes in, he's not going to look at you as a victim or as a witness. He's going to look at you as a deportable immigrant.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Marion Davis from the MIRA Coalition. Marion, when I look at the trend here, one conclusion I could make is that it just continues the pattern of the federal government getting along with states or maybe individual counties to somehow reduce the amount of fuss, the amount of friction that goes on. Isn't that, I guess, about as good as you can get with all the confusion about immigration right now?
No, I mean, we don't really want, the federal government right now has an extreme anti-immigrant agenda. We've never seen a government in the United States, or at least not in my lifetime for sure, really say we're going to go out and get everybody that we can deport and get them out of this country. And they know that it is physically impossible to do that with the resources that they have. ICE is always over budget. No matter how much they spend, they always find a way to need more. So they know they can't do it. So the thing is that now they're trying to take police and sheriffs and turn them into basically unpaid labor for ICE. And that is not appropriate. We actually need them to protect us from criminals. There are actual criminals in our communities. We don't need to make up fictitious ones.
Well, I know that there are maybe local communities who want their police forces to do that. Boston's maybe an exception to that. But looking at the country as a whole, is this the best way to prioritize enforcement?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think that there are people, under the Obama administration, and we don't always agree with the Obama administration, but one of the things that the Obama administration did was they said, if you are somebody whose only problem is that you're here without papers, we're not going to make you a priority. We really don't care about you. We care about the people who have committed felonies or other really serious crimes who should be deported because they have they've been convicted of a serious offense. And we think that that actually does make sense. We shouldn't just be going after people for small matters, just like you don't have the police investing all their resources into getting people who are jaywalking. Well,
one other trend that's come up lately, President Trump says, maybe we ought to send all these immigrants with pending asylum petitions to sanctuary cities. What about that?
That is just a ridiculous circus. He's trying to taunt cities, and one of my favorite responses has been, from the mayor of Cambridge all the way to the mayor of Seattle. They said, "Bring him on. We love him." The truth of the matter is some percentage of those people who are crossing the border are already coming to Boston, because to the extent that they're Salvadorans, they're very likely to go to places where there are other Salvadorans, where they have a cousin or a friend or a sister. So that's already happening. But the idea that we're going to spend, we're just talking about how ICE is over budget already, that we're going to spend millions of dollars to bus people just to teach us a lesson, that's absurd.
And I guess the other thing, too, is that this could get tied up in the courts for quite a long time before it actually hits the ground.
Well, the reality is actually that because the Attorney General now wants to hold all those people without bail, presumably they have contradictory ideas about what to do. But our biggest priority is that we don't get distracted by all the circus from the president, and instead really focus on what we can do better in our communities. And there are opportunities to pass legislation in the state, the Safe Communities Act. There's opportunities to pass stronger ordinances in individual communities. And I think that should be the priority when we think about what we can do in Massachusetts.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Great, thank you.
Marion Davis from the MIRA Coalition. We'll have more news in just a moment.